Elisabeth Sabaditsch Wolff is the daughter of a diplomat. Austria is her home country. Her father was in the United States a good bit while she was growing up. So Elisabeth came to know America, our language, our Constitution, and our customs in her early years. This is when her love for the States began. As many of you have heard me say, Elisabeth managed somehow to be at all the wrong places at just the right time to be on the front lines of history for the last 40 years. She brings a most unique perspective of reality to the table for all of us tonight. You can still find my initial interview that I did with Elisabeth. I had no clue what her story was. That's fun, interviewing somebody and it just unfolds in front of you. Before it was over, she had me in tears, truly. If you'd like, it's an incredible story. I encourage you, go to the Christian Reporter News. It's still archived there under the tab Terrorism. Elisabeth is a fighter for freedom of speech. You see, Elisabeth was arrested for speaking truth at an event. She was discussing Muhammad, the founder of Islam, the man who they consider to be the model of a man, one who all men should copy and imitate with their lives. She was sharing the documented fact from the Quran that he married Aisha when she was 6 years old and consummated that marriage when she was 9. And we typically refer to that as pedophilia. When the judge realized he was about to sentence her for speaking truth, he changed the charges against her from the bench to speaking against a nationally recognized religion. She is still fighting that conviction. Now to the equivalent, she's already passed what would be the equivalent of our Supreme Court, and it's up to, I forget the name, of the European Union. So the battle continues. Can happen here? We just had it happen here. In San Angelo, with a law enforcement training event that I held. Only truth, only documented evidence was presented to the attendees. But Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, the SPLC, put pressure on the law enforcement entity, and now they rescinded those law enforcement officers' continuing ed hours called decoy hours. Truth is being lost and denied here in Texas, in San Angelo even, in America. Elisabeth's timing in being here could not be more timely than today. Please welcome my dear friend, Elisabeth Sabaditsch Wolff.
Again, thank you, Kat, for having me here tonight. I called her almost at the last minute when I found out that I was once again coming to the United States to talk about Europe and what's going on over there. And thank you all for coming tonight. I always thank you for taking out the time to come, because you could be out doing a million other things than listen to what is essentially bad news, but bad news with some hope. Okay? I'm not going to leave you here tonight with, a bad feeling. I will give you some hope. But don't get your hopes up too high. You're still going to have to do something. Okay? Not just sit here. You're going to have to go out and do something. Okay? As Kat introduced me, I was thinking, is this the person? Is this really me? But I guess it is. I'm almost 47 years old. I have experienced quite a bit in my lifetime. And most of what I experienced shaped me into the person I am today and tonight. The person who loves freedom above everything. There's nothing more important in my life than the love of my daughter and freedom. And you see, you don't realize you've lost your freedom until you've actually lost it. You don't know what freedom is until you've lost it. And I have lost it. I've lost it many times, as a matter of fact, not just in the last 10 years, but I'll give you a little story of me growing up in Iran. Prior to the Islamic Revolution back in 1979. Some of you remember that. 1979, a turning point in history. I was there. I was 7 years old. I experienced Iran, which was relatively free before the revolution, which was ruled by the Shah of Iran, who allowed a relative sense of freedom. Don't misunderstand, it's not the same freedom that you enjoy here in the United States, but it was a relative freedom. We could go out, my family and I, we could go on field trips to the Caspian Sea. There was even an Austrian brewery, so we could have wine and beer. There was enough food. You didn't have to be afraid in the streets. And then all of a sudden, in late 1978, everything changed. And the revolution began. And there were riots in the streets. There were demonstrations. I remember these demonstrations. I was a little girl, remember. I remember all these black-clad women who were all of a sudden in favor of wearing the chador, that full black garment that women are now forced to wear. And I realized there was a change going on. There was something in the air. I was afraid. It didn't feel right. My parents didn't explain a lot to me, but I did get the sense that there was something going on until my parents decided, or actually the government, the Iranian government decided, that in late 1978 we had to leave the country. My mom, my sister, and I, we had to leave the country. We went back to Austria, and my parents were essentially separated for nearly 2 years. But what I want to tell you is, overnight, that freedom, that relative freedom, was gone. No more walking in the streets, no more Pepsi. Why? Because it reminded people of vodka. No more 7-Up. Sorry, I mixed it up. It didn't remind people of vodka, whiskey. The 7-Up was the vodka. So no more 7-Up, no more Coke. But when they burned down the house that I was staying in with my mom and my sister, guess who came to our rescue? American firefighter trucks. Okay? It was still some semblance of normalcy, and we did survive it, as you can see. So, when I tell you a little bit about Europe now, that faraway place that you probably don't need to care about, or you think you don't need to care about, I want you to keep in mind that I love freedom of speech, and that you need your freedom of speech. And your freedom of speech is not free unless you fight for it. You have your Constitution, you have your Bill of Rights, both of which we in Europe do not have, and we are currently suffering the consequences, and they are dire. So I will tell you something about Austria and Europe right now. Something unprecedented happened in November of 2016. You remember that? Something that no one ever imagined would happen. That everybody was surprised, and I even shed a tear. I probably was the only one in Austria who shed a tear because I was so happy. Well, something unprecedented happened in Austria last year, last fall. Austria has a new government. Austria, do you all know where Austria is? Let's set the stage first. Okay, you all know where it is. It's Germany and to the south of Germany. Okay. Austria had been ruled by a coalition government, as is always the case, a center-left coalition. So you had a party that was somewhat conservative, and then you had the hard socialists, Marxists, who formed a government. Now in 2015, you all remember the great migration crisis that I was actually talking about here in, was that 2015? Oh yeah. Well, back when I was here, I hadn't seen anything yet. 60? It was 60. Well, it doesn't matter. I was here a couple of years ago. And we had thousands and thousands and thousands of people congregating at the border demanding to be allowed in. And because our government was so weak at the time, and Mrs. Merkel said, well, we'll all have them come in, we can take care of them. We let them in. Nobody had any say in that. I wasn't asked if I wanted these people who I didn't know anything about, nobody else knew anything about, nobody at the border knew anything about them, nobody in the government knew anything about these people. We allowed them in. Most of them traveled on to Germany and Sweden, but a lot of them stayed in Austria. And they didn't change Austria for the better, unfortunately. They were not the doctors and the engineers and the nurses that we had been promised. They turned out to be, many of those turned out to be rapists. They turned out to be asylum seekers who were not asylum seekers. Most of them said they were Syrian, when in truth they were anything but Syrian. They took a lot of money. Many of them are on welfare, most of them as a matter of fact. And they changed the country. So again, let me get back to what I was trying to tell you. Something unprecedented happened in Austria. We have a new government which took power in late 2017. The government has an anti-immigration agenda and its policies, which I will tell you about in a few minutes, are set accordingly. The government has received 58% of the vote, so nearly 60% of all Austrians voted for these two parties to come to form a government. The Conservative Party that I told you about is an arch establishment and mildly conservative party, while the other party is a populist anti-immigration party called the Freedom Party. They had always been considered a pariah. Now they're no longer a pariah. Before I tell you about the main point of their agenda, I will tell you that these are not nationalist parties. They are anti-immigration parties, and I'll tell you the difference. They are, as I said, not nationalist, and they're not interested in imperialism, imperialist power, and or German bloodlines. They have a European, i.e. Western outlook, so some would call them civilizationalist. They are defensive. They don't want to take over any country or any region. They are focused on protecting Western civilization. They seek the retention of Europe, the Europe of Athens and Florence. And they are certainly not far right, because they offer a mix of right in culture and left in economics. So, what's so great about the coalition agreement, which is so relevant for you and also for me in Austria? Because maybe your president and other government officials can take note of this. The coalition government boldly stakes out new ground. And since I'm getting older, I have to take my glasses. I will now read to you the relevant part of this coalition agreement, which reads, Austria guarantees freedom of religion and belief, but fights political Islam. By political Islam, we mean groups and organizations whose ideological foundation is Islam, and which seek to change the basic political and social order by rejecting our constitution and Islamizing society. Political Islam, which can lead to radicalization, anti-Semitism, violence, and terrorism, has no place in our society. I think this is great. I think this is really, really great. Of course, I do have my quibbles with this. I'm not 100% happy, but this is a great start. And let me tell you, I was lucky enough to be a part of this, of shaping this part of the new coalition government. Because I told the people negotiating this part of the document that you need to define political Islam, or otherwise the Supreme Court will strike this down. So I can say it's a little bit my baby, just a bit. Now let me tell you some of the demands made by the conservative part of the government, because that might also be interesting to you, President Trump, and some other political stakeholders. The Austrian Conservative Party, of which I am not a member, I'm a member of no party at all, I'm just giving you the facts. This party demands the following. We need to insist that Muslims accept Austrian values. We need to insist on freedom of speech about Islam. We need to return rejected asylum seekers to their countries of origin. I won't bother you with the rest because this goes too much into detail. But these points, we need Muslims to accept American values. Wouldn't we want that? Shouldn't that be someone's line when you stand for election? We need to insist on freedom of speech on Islam and not just a part. We don't need to separate freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is absolute, isn't it? Not just for one part of society and not just for the other, but for everyone. And shouldn't you also here in the United States be able to return rejected asylum seekers? Are there any rejected asylum seekers? Maybe you want to ask whoever is in office here in San Angelo or in the Texas, you don't call it, what do you call it in the capital, Austin? The legislature. Why don't you ask there, and if not, go to your congressman and demand to know how many rejected asylum seekers? Because this is still a country of the rule of law, isn't it? That's how it should be. Now let me tell you one more thing. We have a Minister of Interior who is excellent. And he has now gone ahead and started amending the Asylum and Aliens Law, which was only recently amended last year with the old government. But I'll tell you what he's planning to do. First of all cash, with the exception of about 120 euros, which is approximately 150 US dollars, will be confiscated. And all that money that's in their pockets will go to cover their cost of the asylum process. So the taxpayer will not be burned. Second, all cell phones and other data will be confiscated to collect geodata of the route taken into Austria. If they enter the country, Austria, from another so-called Dublin country, I will explain in a second, they must return to that country. Now the Dublin Agreement is an agreement in European law that says asylum seekers must remain in the country of origin where they entered the European Union. Austria is a landlocked country. They could not have entered Austria first. So they would have to go back to Greece or Italy or Spain or Malta, but certainly not to Austria. Criminal asylum seekers following jail, they are to be taken to detention centers pending deportation. You're wondering why aren't they doing it now? Well, we had a different government a year ago. potentially criminal asylum seekers. Hospitals, where these potential criminal asylum seekers are treated, must inform the asylum center upon release, so former patients cannot flee. The waiting period for citizenship, for Austrian citizenship, will be raised from 6 years to 10 years. Although, if it were, if I were asked, I'd raise it to 20 years. I think 10 years is still far too soon. And the above points are currently in parliamentary discussion and are expected to pass. I did read there was some heavy discussion. There was parliament was in session today in Austria, and parliament was discussing these points, and there were some very strong disagreements, of course, from the opposition. But still, it's going to be passed more or less the way I just described it to you. One more thing. There was a 2017 law related to aliens, which was a dead letter law. This law will now be reactivated, and I'll tell you what it says. Asylum permits can be revoked if the asylum seeker returns to the country of origins on holiday. I will tell you, let me tell you what happened just a few days ago. Maybe this is better. Okay, we'll try. Oh, much better, much better. Ah, praise the Lord. Okay, Austria has taken in a lot of Chechens from Russia. They are the most violent. They and the Somalis are the most violent kind of Muslims around. A few days ago, a 7-year-old girl was found in a trash can, in a dumpster actually, with her throat stabbed once here. You saw that? Okay, I'll tell you more about that. This girl was of Chechen origin. Her mother is separated from her husband. Her husband is currently in jail in Italy. Her mother has, I think, 6 or 7 more children. They live in welfare housing, but in a nice district in Vienna. So this girl was killed. They found the perpetrator, a 16-year-old, apparently also from Chechnya, a boy. He is currently in jail. But the most important point here is the girl will be buried in Chechnya. And her mother and some other relatives who have been granted asylum status in Vienna, in Austria, are going to travel to Chechnya. Now, if they have received asylum in Vienna, why are they traveling back to Chechnya? Are they going to be killed? So something is wrong here. I don't know the latest. I mean, I just checked it this morning, but something is really wrong here. So this is where this law, this dead letter law, is going to be very effective, hopefully. Because this girl should not be buried in Chechnya, but in Austria. So this just by way of example. Now, the second dead letter law. Rejected asylum seekers lose benefits. If they are rejected, they lose all financial benefits, though not health benefits. And there will be jail or fines if the rejected asylum seeker does not leave the country at the prescribed date. Now, I think you would all agree to that. You would all find this okay, you would agree to it. Maybe you should talk to your elected officials and discuss it. Another thing, another point that the Austrian government has started, which I think is not a good idea, but I'll tell you anyway, they are trying to ban the hijab, the Islamic headscarf. The reason they say they want to ban it is to safeguard the children and to prevent parallel societies. The reason I'm telling you this, that this might also come to the United States. This is not just Europe, this is not just Austria, this is not far away. Believe me, you will have these discussions sooner rather than later. So that's why I'm telling you this. Now, I think the banning of this headscarf is generally a good idea. The problem, though, is that the ban applies, according to what is discussed among politicians in Austria, only to kindergarten and primary school girls, primary school aged girls. It should be extended to the age of 14. I personally believe it should be until university starts. Why do I think that? Because it's absurd to consider a 12-year-old mature enough to decide on a headscarf, but not be of age for criminal prosecution. That's the age of 12. So they're mature enough to decide on the headscarf, but not mature enough to be prosecuted. That doesn't make sense. So that's why I think that's a problem. You don't see me jumping up and down at the new government. If I were happy with the government, I would actually jump up and down. But I'm a very realistic person. I don't live in the dream world. So I will now tell you why I'm not 100% happy just yet. I'll give you a few reasons. The Conservative Party merely mouths these positions, but it doesn't want to go beyond the European consensus. So we believe, my colleagues and I believe, it's going to be more of the same, nothing dramatic ahead. Again, the national government is quite hemmed by the European Union, this big blob that regulates my life and my freedom of speech, or lack thereof. So I don't think a lot is going to happen, although I'm going to make sure something is going to happen. Beyond these three power centers, the entire establishment of, for instance, the police, politicians, press, priests, yes, unfortunately, the church is complicit in most of the bad stuff going on in Austria. The professors and, sadly enough, the prosecutors, all of those do not want any change. So, when we talk about Europe, in comparison with the United States, you have President Trump, I wanted to say Reagan, don't we wish he'd be back? It was on my, I wanted to say that. But it hasn't trickled down. There's still a swamp, right? And it's still very deep. And that swamp needs to be drained not only by President Trump, but also by you. You have the power. You are the people. So, the problem in Austria is, and in Europe, that the Austrian population, despite that nearly 60% vote in favor of the new government, is not focused on the issue and is not pressuring the government to do anything about it. That is a problem. So again, coming back to the United States, don't ever think that Trump is going to fix it, because he's not going to fix it. If you have problems and issues here in San Angelo, you can fix it, not President Trump. Okay? That's my main message to you. So, going back to my most important point about freedom of speech, I want you to listen to me carefully what is happening about freedom of speech in Austria. Fear has returned to Europe. There's a fear to speak freely. There's a fear of denunciation, the fear of being caught in the media's wrath, the fear of being forced to deny one's cultural and intellectual identity, the fear of distrusting one's neighbor. This is all happening to me. I was in the media's wrath. People do not want to do what I am doing because they see what is happening to me. I lost my job. People didn't want to talk to me. They ignored me. They called me names. Now, 10 years later, they come up to me, oh, if only we had listened to you 10 years ago. And you know what, I don't tell them anything, but I just think to myself, well, maybe you should have done something, because it's too late now. I always, because I don't have freedom of speech in Austria, I always catch myself, and many others do the same thing. When we start a private conversation in someone's home, we started with, well, you know, we actually shouldn't say this, but. I'm not a racist, but. That's already self-censorship. Okay? You don't realize that, but I do. When I start my conversation, well, I shouldn't actually be saying this. Yes, you should. You should be saying this. Okay? This is America. This is the land of the free and the home of the brave. The land of the First Amendment, which we don't have in Austria and in Europe. Where there's a new law in the United Kingdom where people who speak out against Islam can be jailed for up to 6 years. Wake up. It's going to come here too. Don't think the First Amendment will protect you for the rest of your lives. It's not. You have to do something. And you should never, ever start any conversation with, well, we shouldn't be saying this. Well, I'm afraid to say that. Just say it. You have freedom of speech. Say it. And bear the consequences. Because if you don't speak out, someone else is going to speak out. And maybe the other person will say things you don't like very much. But speak out. So Europeans are living under a bizarre tyranny of self-esteem where feelings can lead, feelings, not facts, feelings, can lead to court cases and where the easily offended can marshal the state to crush those who dared to offend them. Remember that. Feelings. We are now living in times of feelings, not of facts. Okay? It should be facts only, right? If you have feelings, maybe you should have those feelings for your family or your friends. But you should never be taken to court for feelings, ever. Only the truth will set us free, right, Pastor? Let me give you an example, not example. I will tell you the difference between freedom of speech and in Europe and in the United States. In Europe, the net of freedom of speech is drawn much tighter on permitted speech. For instance, speech that, listen to this carefully, speech that harms individuals based on characteristics, race, religion, sexual orientation, and the like. It's not whether you spoke the truth, it's rather who said something and the feelings it caused to another person. In the United States, friends, you have the First Amendment, which places more protection on speech, and thankfully courts still resist the temptation to place limitations on speech. Do not think for a moment it's not going to happen, that there will be restrictions. I attend free speech conferences on an international level in Europe, where the United States is also a participating state. There is a big push, and there has been for many years, on hate speech legislation. Hate speech legislation is contrary to the First Amendment. The United States is at this table agreeing. Your representatives are at the table in Warsaw, Poland, every year, agreeing to this. It's a consensus-based organization. Maybe you want to ask your legislators about what is going on at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in Warsaw, Poland, every fall, where there's hate speech legislation that will trickle down and one day show up in the United States. Think about that. A government, any government, must never become an arbiter of acceptable viewpoints at any given time. My government must never tell me what I am allowed to say and what not. You do not need freedom of speech for the Sunday talk on the radio or television. You do not need freedom of speech for Trump's Sunday speeches or the president of Austria talking to us. You need freedom of speech for that which disturbs and perhaps even insults you. And if it insults you too much, there are laws against that. But that's what you need freedom of speech for, not for the Sunday talk, for that which offends you, because that in the end will bring us forward. Hate speech laws will bring us backwards. We don't want that. We want to look to the future. Let me give you an example. You're going to keep track of the time for me? Okay. Let me give you some concrete examples of freedom of speech, or the lack thereof in France. Journalists saying that, for instance, journalists are saying Islam is not so much a religion of peace, are systematically and harshly prosecuted. For example, you all remember Charlie Hebdo, the attacks? Those journalists were prosecuted in 2006, 7, 12, and 13. You have Michel Houellebecq, the guy who wrote the book Submission. He was prosecuted in 2010. You have Eric Zemmour. He was prosecuted in 2011. You have a group called Riposte Laïque in 2018 who were fined $12,000 and a 3-month suspended sentence for incitement to hatred against Muslims. I'm standing here before you, protected by the First Amendment. Have I ever mentioned the word Muslims before in here? I don't talk about Muslims, I talk about Islam. That's what I criticize. I criticize a religion and an ideology, not people, not a person. But I still am prosecuted. And this group, Riposte Laïque, is currently standing trial and could be, the owner of this, or the president of this group could be imprisoned this time. Let me read something to you. It's okay to say the following in France. You tell me, is this fair or not? And I'm quoting here. These are not my words. Greedy Jews control the global financial system. Zionists kill Palestinian children for pleasure. Nothing. Radio silence. Nothing will happen. You can walk the streets and nothing will happen to you saying these things. But dropping a slice of ham in front of a mosque will get you several weeks of jail. I do not agree with that, by the way. I would never do that. I would never drop a piece of ham in front of a mosque. But you see the disproportionate, there's something wrong here. Attacks on Christianity, for instance, rarely lead to prosecution. My own charge was, I was prosecuted under the denigration of religious teachings of a legally recognized religion in Austria. Notice it says religion, it doesn't say Islam. How many prosecutions do you think have taken place, let's say in the last 10 years, against someone who blasphemed Christianity? Any guesses, any ideas? 0. Okay? There's something really rotten here. Freedom of speech in Germany. Silencing of political opponents of the government. Don't think it's not going to happen here just because it's happening in Germany. It will come here. The police chief of Cologne filed charges against a politician from a similar party to the Austrian Freedom Party. They are not liked by the establishment. So a lady from this political party said something that the police chief didn't like. He filed charges. That's not his job, but he filed it, the police chief. So through censorship and criminal charges, outspoken critics and political opponents of the government, this is an opposition party, so political opponents of the government are silenced. If you criticize policies of the government, you are being silenced. We are no longer dealing with a democracy, but with a regular police state. If the police file charges, then we're a police state. Poking fun is no longer allowed. Satirical magazine is blocked on Twitter because it's not allowed to say the following. Muslim men are taking a second wife to finance their lives. Germans are taking a second job. Again, those wouldn't be my words, but this is clearly poking fun at something, right? I can't say that, sorry. There's ignorance among the population about authoritarian censorship going on. No, certainly no one in my circle of friends cares about freedom of speech, I'm sorry to say. Now what can we do? What can you do? Treat all people fairly and according to their actions. That should be number one. Abolish all hate speech laws. Of course, that doesn't apply to you yet. But let's say, if you ever hear hate speech laws being discussed, you get up and you do something. And you say no. Okay? That'll be your job. When you leave tonight, you listen carefully. The word hate speech laws must never be anywhere in the United States, ever. And we should all stop traveling down the road to censorship. We should realize that this road can be traveled very fast. It's happened to us in Europe, it's happening to us in Europe, and it is also happening here in the United States, but remember, you still have the First Amendment. And also, be careful when you hear the word thought crime. This is the new thing, the new fad in thought crimes. George Orwell must be turning in his grave, because it's even worse than what he wrote about. We are being punished for what we are thinking, not for what we are doing. People are being asked, well, actually not, they're being arrested for crimes, for hate crimes, yet unsaid or undone in the United Kingdom. Okay? Actually, an American journalist and a Canadian journalist were arrested and deported from the United Kingdom under that new charge. Watch out, United States, it's coming here. So, I'm going to skip the withdrawal of state power, but I think I will now tell you about, I'm going to go to the PowerPoint presentation and show you something. Here is my presentation. Not this one. Okay, you see this? Look at the numbers. It's in German, but I think you can all, can you see? Am I in your way? Yeah? Can everybody see? Okay. In 1971, had a total of almost 5 million. That was 0.3% of the population. In 1991, we had 2% population of Muslims in Austria. 2009, we're up to 8.35 million. And what's interesting here is the 6.2%. So 6.2% of the population in Austria is Muslim. By the way, this has gone up to 10% as of 2018. You see the demographic shifts, how quickly this is going on. In Vienna, for the first time this school year, this past school year, there's a need for more Muslim religious teachers than Catholic religious teachers. Just so you know the change in demographics. This is another one, another slide showing you the changes. In 2016, there were officially 700,000 Muslims in Austria, out of a population of, well, it says here 7 million it should be. It's more. It was definitely more because of the migrants who came in. It's probably already more than, it was back then already nearly 10%, let me put it that way. The Islamization of Austria, how does it happen? How does it take place? Here you have a school book. Let me show you here. This is the German word. The breaking of the fast after Ramadan, after each day of, we're actually in Ramadan right now. Yeah? So this school book, this is I think, what it says 1, so it's probably first grade. And it says here, the breaking of the fast. Now why would a first grader be taught about the Muslim breaking of the fast when it should be taught Austrian customs rather than Islamic customs? You can do that later, you don't have to do it in first grade, right? This is what a Christmas market in the German town of Bochum looked like last Christmas. You see, to ward off any of the truck drivers who may have taken the wrong exit, this is what they look like. This is how our countries are changing. Here's another Christmas market in Germany. Why do we all of a sudden need those barriers? What for? We didn't have them before. We didn't have the need for them before. The headscarf that I was talking about. It says here in German, normality among children. The Islamic faith community in Austria, in response to the proposed ban of the headscarf, has informed the public that only about 15% of all Muslim children in Austria wear the head under the age of, 10, wear the headscarf. I say 15%, that's a high percentage. It should be 0. So they're telling us, don't worry about it, it's only 15%. Imagine that. Imagine a 3-year-old wearing a headscarf. It's happening. I've seen many of them. As a matter of fact, this is what one of them looks like. They have started, the Islamic faith community has started Twitter hashtags featuring these little girls, not without my hijab. I bet they chose to do that. Another one. My headscarf is my identity, not without my headscarf. Another one. Hands off my headscarf. A 5-year-old? They should be playing outside. They shouldn't have to worry about covering their head and their hair. And they're being sexualized. A 5-year-old. This is how they protested in Austria, the Muslim ban. It's not a Muslim ban. Nobody's banning Muslims. Nobody is banning Muslims. But we don't want to see it in the streets. We don't want to accommodate it. We don't want to accommodate our culture into Islamic culture. This was a big, big scandal before Christmas as well. Interestingly enough, this chain BIPA, which is similar to CVS, something like that, they've had to close some of their stores. This was very unpopular in Austria. Now, the Islamization of Austria, war games in mosques, another big, big scandal recently in Austria. This is taking place in mosques all across Austria. Let me just find my notes so I can tell you a little more about this. This is one of the official mosques in Austria, and everybody was upset, shocked that this would happen. As a matter of fact, it happens all the time. A recent study showed that the second most important factor in the radicalization is the environment, namely the mosque and imams, and face-to-face encounters. What's that? That's a radicalization. It's happening all over. More photos? More photos here. See, all the girls are covered. One more. I hope you can see this. This is the reenactment of a battle of World War I. And you see here young boys playing the dead, the fallen soldiers, all draped in Turkish flags. This is what's taking place in mosques. Maybe you should also take a closer look at all the mosques around here. How many are there? Okay, maybe you should take a closer look at what's going on in your mosques. Now, May 1st is always a big deal in Austria, especially for those socialists in Austria. This is what it looked like this year. Celebration of 125 years of glorious socialism in Austria. So here you have a lot of people, that's what it looked like. But a lot of them also, and I can't see the slide here, so we'll skip it. There were a lot of Turkish flags found in these demonstrations. Shouldn't it be only Austrian flags and not Turkish flags? I mean, we're not a Turkish state. We're not a satellite state. But the socialists love that because that is the voter of the next generation. So let me show you here also the Christmas markets, not only in Germany, but also in Austria. This is what it looked like. So we got these wonderful bollards to protect our Christmas markets. This is what a Christmas market looked like. One of the Christmas markets in a Turkish majority part of Vienna. Doesn't look very Christmassy to me. I don't know what you think. This is Schönbrunn Castle. I think you may have heard of this. This is one of the beautiful imperial castles in Vienna that has to be protected by one of these beauties. See this one? Beautiful, isn't it? This is what it used to look like. Isn't it gorgeous? Don't you want to go to Austria? Okay. Yeah. This is the seat of government in the center of Vienna. I actually, in a life past, used to work here. This used to be my office right here when I was working for the Deputy Prime Minister back in the 1990s. But this is changing now. This is what it looks like now. You don't want this here, do you? Just saying. Isn't this beautiful? This is the seat of the government. And on the other side here, this building here, this is old. This is, by the way, the Imperial Palace of the Habsburg family. Okay? And this is where the President of Austria has his office. Look at the Islamization. I don't think I have to add anything. You can read it. See how it changes? See how it's changing? Look at this. The playground. The demographics are doing this to us. See that? I'd like to tell you how we're doing on time. Okay. Okay. I'd like to tell you something about this slide. Just have to find my notes. Because this was a huge deal. This is actually a slide showing the attempted deportation of a Togolese man whose asylum whose asylum application was rejected. Problem was that not only the Togolese didn't think it was cool to be deported, but 150 of his friends also thought so. What happened was the police retreated. Can you imagine that? The police retreats? There's a power vacuum here. What do you think happens when there's a power vacuum like this? It's an awful question because the answer will be barbary. That's the question and that's the answer. If there's a vacuum, police must be respected, and we thank them for the service also. We have a choice. Either we have the rule of law or we have barbary. There's no third possibility. And this barbary that we are witnessing in Europe right now will lead to anarchy, dictatorship, and other inhuman manifestations. I don't like what I'm seeing, ladies and gentlemen. I don't like it. I'm afraid. Again, only those who agree to deportation can be deported. This young man did not agree, and this is what it looks like right now. Right now, the latest that I've read about this guy was that he has in fact been deported back to Italy, because that's where he first entered the European Union, but he's allowed back. Okay, so this is what it looked like. These are the 150, some of the 150 of his friends. And you see the police on the left. Okay, see the victory? The state must never show this weakness. Never, ever. The police are here to protect us, not to back down. And we need to back them. You see this? This is the Togolese guy. And the other, no, this one, the left one is the Togolese and the other one is one of his great friends. This is what the rule of law currently looks like in Vienna. Now, I can't spare you this and then I will get to the end. There are many victims of Merkel's Islamization of Germany. One of these victims is a girl called Mia Valentin, 15 years old, and she was stabbed by this guy who claims to be 18, but in fact is much older than 18. He doesn't look like 18. I don't know what you think, but I don't think he looks like 18. And what it says in the bottom, on the bottom right-hand side, it says, you know, her name was purged from all the material that surrounded her demise. The school that she attended actually says, the classmate whose name we will not mention. Poor Mia. Poor Mia. I will tell you a little more about her, because I think it's important to pay respects to these victims. Like I said, she's 15 years old, and you know, this is actually a case where it should have been, people should have been warned, because in November 27, so I'm just giving you a short timeline, this guy, Abdul, destroyed a fellow student's glasses, so everybody should have been like, ooh, we better watch out, you know, this guy's maybe not that nice. December 27, this young man rammed a knife into Mia's heart. She was dead right away. Before Mia was killed, police had searched for this guy, but he was gone. Couldn't find him anymore. Abdul entered Germany in April of 2016. How did he get there? He must have entered illegally, because also Germany is sort of landlocked country. He entered on a plane. Somebody must have given him permission to board that plane, otherwise you can't get into Germany. And there are many questions regarding the immigration policies of the German government. This young man was known to police, and they didn't arrest him. They didn't deport him. And this is exacerbated by 50,000 unaccompanied minors. 50,000. I'm not saying that every one of those will do something will be harmful to the girls, but there are many. Next one. This is Maria. 19 years old, student at medical school, raped and then drowned. Maria volunteered at a refugee center. The perpetrator was a 17-year-old unaccompanied minor from Afghanistan who arrived in Germany in 2015 with one of these great migration waves entering Germany. This is one of the propaganda shows that you will see on TV in Germany. This is Malvina and Dia. Dia, that's how he pronounces himself. She's 16 years old. He is apparently 19, which he's definitely not. And this is actually a show or a movie shown on television showing the love of a young German girl and an Afghan refugee. Is this what we want for our children? I'm not sure. This is what they look like, the happy couple. Do you think he's 19? Okay, this is propaganda shown on German television. Okay? So, this is the end of my slides. I will give you some quotes and then I will finish or wrap it up. The EU Commissioner, the unelected EU Commissioner, I did not vote for this guy, he cannot be elected, says the following. We cannot and will never be able to stop migration. At the end of the day, we all need to be ready to accept migration and diversity as the new norm and tailor our policies accordingly. Immigration, end quote. Immigration is thus an unescapable reality. We have to adapt without further discussion. Europeans want an end to immigration and they want to regain control of borders. But this man from the unelected government of the European Union says migration is an emotional and sensitive issue influenced by rising nationalism, populism, and xenophobia, end quote. I don't see any of that, but... And migration, according to this man, is not open for debate, and all the norms are determined by this unelected government of the European Union. Ladies and gentlemen, we have more than 50,000 jihadists living in Europe. Women can no longer exercise their freedom to walk in safety in many neighborhoods. The European Commission says its top priority is security. Now, how about closing those borders? And that goes for you as well. You might want to close those borders. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you the scenario for Europe. And then I'm going to finish. We will see an internal fracture of Europe. We will see two parallel society. We will see debasement of Western culture. We are losing our God, and Islam is filling the cultural vacuum, the religious vacuum of a society with no children, in which believes wrongly, it has no enemies. We have a choice. We can have Sharia, Islamic law, in Austria and Europe, or some form of authoritarian governments by leaders of our own native ethnic groups. At some point, martial law will be imposed, which will be followed by the reduction of even more civil liberties. I don't want to see this, ladies and gentlemen. I'm responsible to my child. She is my main responsibility. She's the love of my life. She is the reason I am doing this, and she's the reason I will never, ever, ever stop speaking out. They can throw me in jail, I don't care, but I will never stop speaking out, And I hope you will join me in that. And I thank you very much for coming tonight.
We're gonna do a Q&A in just a moment, but before we do that, I want to encourage you to consider what you can sow into Elisabeth's work. Fighting for freedom. She's truly on today's front lines, even though they're moving over here. She doesn't have an entity that's bankrolling her efforts, nor can she apply for grants or types of funding. She is totally dependent on what people like you and me can sow into her efforts. The gentlemen are going to start passing some buckets, and if you would, please give generously. We need more people like Elisabeth on the front lines, fighting for this cause. Before there is no freedom of speech left. When I put her on the plane to head back to Austria, she once again, as she said, she will have to remember that she can no longer speak openly, share what she really thinks, without great risk to herself and her family. So please consider giving what you can. We are going to open up for Q&A in just a moment. If you'll notice, there's 2 microphones that are in the aisles. And if you have a question, if you would please go to one of the 2 mics. We're asking you to do that because we are videoing this, and that way it will get picked up on the video.
I do, but this will go into an escrow account. So there's a website that's called savefreespeech.org. Savefreespeech.org. There's a PayPal button that you can click, and that will go straight to my lawyer. That money, because I still owe him money.
Okay, if you have a question, if y'all would go to the microphone, and then we will let Elisabeth begin to answer.
I don't really have a question. Elisabeth, I wanted to thank you for bringing this to our attention. It's really opened my eyes. There's a lot of research I'm going to do. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here tonight. I guess I did my job when I, told you about my story. Please don't think that there's any hatred. I mean, I don't think you can find any hatred in my heart. There isn't any. I'm even grateful to the girl who surreptitiously recorded my speeches in Austria and brought me to the attention of the police and the prosecutor. Because without her, I wouldn't be standing here. So one of these days, if I ever run into her again, I'm going to say, thank you very much. You've done a lot of good. It wasn't a lot of fun being prosecuted, okay? I'm telling you that. But I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't be here in this beautiful city for the second time, which I've come to love. I love San Angelo. I love Texas. Yeah, and if you go online and you check out the resources, you start with Kat's website and then you work your way through, you might want, if you want to know what's going on in Europe, check out the website gatesofvienna.net. That is an excellent resource for everything that goes on in Europe, but also what I'm up to. Okay, you will find a lot of information there. It's probably better than the CIA when it comes to Europe. Any other questions, or did I shock you? Yes, ma'am.
You didn't shock me. Mainly because I've been doing a lot of reading. Ironically enough, this evening when we were driving here, we were listening to PBS, and they had a woman on whose specialty was, as she said it, fertility, and why the birth rate is going down in the United States, Japan, France, Germany, etc., etc. What I found very interesting is that she never broke it out as far as demographic groups. She ignored the fact that, yeah, there is a large population that is going ahead and having numerous children and upping. She did say immigrants are responsible for the increases in the population, but she never said who it was. And I think we can pretty well guess who it is, especially in Sweden and Germany and France and Holland and Austria and Italy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for coming tonight.
I have a question for you. What do you suggest would be the best route for us to take as individuals to try and get the word out to, I guess, the legislative body that make our decisions? You know, I see our culture evolving very quickly, and the media in this country is very one-sided, one way or the other. And I see them trying to indoctrinate our country into their line of what's our norm, where should we be, how should we think. And I'm seeing a takeover of our value systems, and it's changing. And this is one of the ways that it's changing, is that, you know, it seems like Christians can get beat up on, but others can't. You know, it used to be kind of a racially divided thing, but now it seems to be more headed toward religious beliefs. What can we as individuals do to impact? I mean, we do have the power of the vote, and I stand firm on that. I know that, you know, you're talking about the Syrian refugees, and our country went through time, and under our leadership, allowing the refugees, and some states let them in, and some states didn't let them in, and I suppose that's kind of similar to the countries in Europe. You know, they're kind of like our states. Some let them in, and some didn't let them in. What can we do as individuals?
Well, the first thing you can do, you have to empower yourselves with knowledge. That's the first step, which means you read, and you read. You log on to websites like Gates of Vienna, like Understanding the Threat, John Guandolo's website. There are numerous websites out there. Log on to jihadwatch.org. That's Robert Spencer's website. Go to the local library, check out some books, maybe even read the Quran, so you know what you're talking about. Only then should you go to your legislators. Maybe hook up with Act for America. Hook up with Roy White. If you want to do something, hook up with Roy White, talk to him, see how you can help him, and volunteer to check Texas textbooks for factually incorrect errors. There's so many ways you can do your part. Go to your legislators and tell them, you know, I don't like this or that. We don't have that power in Austria. This is one thing I like about the United States system so much, that you can actually go to your legislator. I don't even know who my legislator is. He wouldn't even care who I am. But you have that power, and you should take advantage of that. And I agree, of course, you have the power of the vote. Yes, but that's not all. Okay? So first thing is, get educated, and then move on. And Kat will also be helpful in giving you more information, where to go and who to talk to. Okay? Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. I'm afraid we already have some hate crimes bill here. Do because they did push some of that through on the federal level. But what I want to ask you is...
I was talking about hate speech, not
Oh,
hate
hate
crime.
speech, okay. So it's different.
Slightly. One leads to the other.
And what I want to ask you is, I know there's a lot of presenting as conservative here, and they're not really conservative, and I say I'm conservative, but we're defining it different, and I was just curious as to what the party you were talking about, the conservative.
Well, I call them the so-called conservative party because they're no longer conservative. They left the conservative, this party has left its conservative values behind in the 1990s even. It's gone on for a long time. So they call themselves conservative, but they aren't. So it would be one of these rhino parties, I guess. Okay, so,
Okay,
but there is a resurgence of conservative values, and it's a start, you know, it's a start. It's not socialism anymore, thank God, so the Socialist Party has been ousted. And also, by the way, the Greens Party has imploded, which is a very, very left-leaning party. No more Greens, thank God for that. I'm very happy about that, so are many others. So, you know, again, the Conservative Party is not really conservative. The Freedom Party is not conservative enough from my perspective, but it's a start.
And so you can't name, you were talking about another party,
Well, it's a Conservative Party and the Freedom Party.
okay. And
Those are the two parties in power
Okay.
right now. No, I named them. They're called that way.
Yeah.
It's the Austrian People's Party and the Austrian Freedom Party. Those are the two parties
This
that
is
are in the
interesting.
government right now.
Yeah.
Okay?
All right. Thank
Okay,
you
thank
very
you.
much.
Yes, sir.
How large is your legislature?
It's usually 6 years, but the government decided to call for elections a year ahead.
How many members of the legislature?
183.
183.
Yeah.
How many of them are Muslim?
Our party?
How many of them are Muslim?
One, and he's funny, very funnily enough, and I'm using this I'm using this on purpose. He is a member of the Conservative Party, and he is apparently a Sufi, who is, some will consider a moderate, and he's the guy I actually, I go to when I discuss matters. You know, he's my point of contact, basically. He's a very nice guy, and I don't agree with everything he says, but he's one of the good guys, so
Okay.
one.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions?
Okay, well, go and learn. Go home and study hard. And I'm sure that Kat will bring in wonderful people who have a lot
Yes.
more to talk about.
Yes, over the next year, we're planning on bringing in probably a speaker a month. So this is an excellent way to get educated on a variety of topics. A lot of the people that we'll have coming in are international as well as from across the United States. So next time when you come, bring someone, help them get educated. You know, because bottom line, it's up to us at the ground level, at San Angelo, to make a difference. And it's the little things, be it the education or be it the law enforcement deal we just are dealing with right now. We've got to fight this battle, and it starts here. And as Elisabeth was saying throughout her deal, how there were signs all along the way, and people didn't pay attention. We can't afford, there's nowhere else for us to go. As Rafael Cruz will say, you know, we've got to fight for America because there isn't anywhere else to go. And the rest of the world looks to us, and it's because of our Constitution and our freedom of speech and the different rights that we have that are being used against us. We've got to start saying no, you know, and drawing the line and standing up. Believe me, I'm on the front lines right now. It's not real fun being a target, but we've got to do it. You know, this small group of people we have here tonight can make a world of difference. It's always been a remnant of people that has changed the world and made a difference. So, was she awesome this evening?